Today we're going to talk about the 5 things you need to know about vSAN networking. Networking is something that sometimes the VMware admin thinks, well, that's someone else's problem. That's the networking team. But if you're managing storage across it, it's very important, and there's some things to think about in order to get the best performance, consistency, and availability. So the performance, it's very dependent on, first off, let's just say fast networking. I know when HCI first started, 1 gigabit per second links were kind of ruled the top of rack of the data center. We quickly said, okay, let's move to 10 gig, for all flash. And as we're moving forward, 25 is kind of the new 10. It's definitely something to think about. Some other things to look at is your switches and your switch performance. Some things I really want to see to have a healthy, high-performance vSAN cluster are one, real switches. So no type of weird fabric extender devices. I want stuff that has real port-to-port capabilities. We're also going to want switches that were designed for data centers, not something that's called an access layer. I don't need to name any names. But if you go look at your network vendor's website and it's under the campus section, that means it's for plugging things in under desks, probably not high-performance storage.
Yeah, and John, I think that really brings up a good point here because, oftentimes somebody will see a switch as just a switch. But when you look at the, at the view here that we're looking at, we realize that vSAN is a fully distributed storage system. So it's dependent on the network in order to commit these writes in a very resilient way. And so it's absolutely critical for performance and availability that we have a very sure thing here in our switching fabric.
Well, and one thing that Pete's drawn here, as you'll see, is we have 2 switches. So that way we can handle maintenance activity or failure on update. I know some of these switches now have the ability to patch within support updates and things like that. But, you still want to have 2 switches with diverse paths. Now, there's different ways to set up that, how you handle that redundancy. The default, and a pretty common one that I like, is you kind of use an active-passive design. And so in this case, you actually have one route that is not the primary link, but is used only in case of a failover. And you'll set up all the hosts to use that one path. But you can still use that path for other things. So a very common configuration you'll find, I think VxRail does this by default, is vSAN goes down one path by default, vMotion goes down the other. In the event of a failure, they can still stand by, fail over to the other. So that's kind of your active standby. You can also use technologies like link aggregation. And this is, where if you're using, if you go into LACP and configure this, do note there's a lot of ways to misconfigure this. So you'll need to set the hash that's used for that. The default IP hash on the standard switch, it's not really going to cut it. You're going to want to use a more advanced hash if you go down that. And you need to have the same hash configured on the ports on the switch. If you don't configure this correctly, you have hash mismatches. Well, that is a fun thing to say. You'll actually see some very dubious performance and sometimes even availability challenges. Sometimes a little too much complexity with lag. If you're not already there, it's not something you're already doing, I don't necessarily recommend it.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I think worth noting here is that, when we think about networking in general, especially something like network switches, this generally falls outside of the management domain of what vSphere and vSAN is able to actually handle. However, we've introduced some new health checks that will look from vCenter server and check the status of those network uplinks. If you have an LACP configuration, simply to see if you are running into an overabundance of retransmits, which are going to have a profound impact.
The vSAN Performance Service does a great job today of showing you what's going on with that. So if you click into your vCenter on the hosts and you go to the monitor tab and then down into performance, you can actually see a bunch of very detailed stats. There's health checks, there's latency checks, and this is constantly being advanced. This has been something that our global support teams have actually provided a lot of feedback for stuff. And one kind of tip and trick is, if you are designing this network and you're looking at this, we really like to see a leaf spine design. So as you start scaling to larger and larger data centers, you'll have your top of rack leafs, but then move to a spine, and kind of what we like to see is a non-blocking architecture, enough throughput that you can reach all of the hosts without, necessarily a oversubscription, or at least not a lot of oversubscription.
For more information on vSAN networking and all things related to vSAN, feel free to jump out to core.vmware.com and look at all the design guides, troubleshooting guides, and performance guides. Thank you very much.